My husband of 15 years ended our marriage with a phone call while I was visiting my sick mother. "I need a change, Rachel. I've met someone else. I won't be home when you return." Just like that, Daniel erased our life together. 6 months. Later, he moved his new wife Olivia into what they thought was their dream home on Cedar Lake, the historic cottage my grandmother had left to me in a trust Daniel knew nothing about. The moment Olivia realized the lakefront property they'd been renovating wasn't actually theirs, the smug smile she'd worn throughout their housewarming party vanished completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The evening air was crisp with early autumn scents when the truth finally came to light, changing everything forever. If this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed for more powerful stories of resilience and unexpected justice. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what part of this journey speaks to you most. Cedar Grove. Looks like a picture-perfect small town from travel magazines, with its historic downtown and pristine waterfront. Yet behind the charming storefronts and carefully maintained historic homes, it harbors the same complex web of relationships and secrets as any community. I'd grown up here, left for college, and returned only after meeting Daniel, whose architectural firm was making a name for itself designing modern homes that complemented rather than clashed with the town's historic character. We met at a Preservation Society fundraiser where I was photographing the event. 3 dates later, I knew he was special. 3 months later, we were inseparable. 3 years later, we were married in the garden of Willow's Edge, my grandmother's lakefront cottage, with Cedar Lake shimmering behind us as we exchanged vows. "This place is magical," Daniel had whispered that day, his eyes reflecting the water. "Someday, we'll live here." I'd simply squeezed his hand, not telling him that someday was always possible. My grandmother had left Willow's Edge to me in a special trust that activated on her passing, with specific instructions that the property remain my separate asset, protected from any future claims. It was her way of ensuring the cottage that had been in our family for 4 generations would remain so, regardless of what life might bring. I'd never told Daniel about this arrangement, planning to surprise him on our 20th anniversary with the news that we could renovate and move into the cottage as we entered the next chapter of our lives. Instead, 15 years into our marriage, while I was 2 states away caring for my mother after her surgery, Daniel called to say he'd found someone new. Olivia Patel was a talented interior designer who had consulted on several of his projects. She was a decade younger, ambitious, and according to mutual friends who awkwardly tried to comfort me after the separation, completely infatuated with Daniel and everything he represents. The divorce proceeded with clinical efficiency, Daniel's attorney pushing for a quick resolution, which I now understand was timed to coincide with his new relationship and plans. Throughout our marriage, we had rented Willow's Edge to carefully selected tenants, the income managed by a property company as specified in my grandmother's trust. Daniel had always viewed the cottage as a quaint but ultimately impractical property, too traditional for his modern aesthetic. "It needs too much work," he'd said whenever I'd suggested we consider moving there ourselves. The maintenance on a historic property like that would be endless, which made it all the more surprising when, 4 months after our divorce was finalized, I received an invitation to a housewarming party at Willow's Edge, now being called the Lake House, according to the elegant cardstock invitation signed by Daniel and Olivia Bennett. Nathan Carter, my oldest friend and the only person from our shared social circle who had unequivocally taken my side in the divorce, brought the invitation to our weekly coffee meeting, his expression a mixture of disbelief and concern. "You need to see this," he said, sliding the envelope across the table. "They've purchased Willow's Edge, or at least they think they have." I stared at the invitation, my fingers tracing the embossed lettering. "That's impossible," I whispered. "The cottage is in a trust. It can't be sold without my signature, and I certainly haven't signed anything." Nathan's expression shifted from concern to confusion, then to dawning realization as I explained the specifics of my grandmother's arrangement. "So they don't actually own it?" he asked, leaning forward. What exactly is going on? What was going on became clearer after a call to Megan Reynolds, the real estate agent who managed the property for me. "Oh, Rachel," she said, her voice tight with professional restraint. "I've been trying to reach you, your tenant. Mr. Crawford received an offer to buy out his lease from Daniel's company, Bennett Architectural Solutions. They presented paperwork that appeared to show they'd purchased the property from Cedar Lake Holdings. Cedar Lake Holdings, the limited liability company my grandmother had established as the technical owner of the property, with the trust, and ultimately me, as the beneficiary. A company whose existence had never been mentioned in any of my conversations with Daniel. But they haven't purchased it," I said slowly. "They can't have." "No," Megan confirmed. "They definitely haven't. What they have is a fraudulent document showing a sale that never happened. Mr. Crawford accepted their buyout and vacated last month. According to my sources, Daniel and his new wife have been renovating extensively ever since. The housewarming is this Saturday." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Daniel, who had access to some of my financial documents during our marriage, must have discovered the existence of Cedar Lake Holdings. With his connections in town and his persuasive abilities, he had somehow created paperwork convincing enough to fool a tenant into believing the property had changed hands. He was now presenting himself and Olivia as the rightful owners of my family's historic cottage. "What are you going to do?" Nathan asked after I explained what I'd learned. We were sitting on the balcony of my downtown loft, watching the sunset paint Cedar Grove's historic district in golden light. The modern space had been my refuge after moving out of the home Daniel and I had shared, its clean lines and open concept the opposite of the cottage's cozy, compartmentalized rooms. "I'm going to their housewarming party," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. "I'm going to see exactly what they've done to my property, and then I'm going to reclaim it." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Just like that? You'll walk in and announce you're the actual owner?" I smiled, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "No. I think there's a more effective way to handle this. Daniel has created an illusion for Olivia and their friends. I want to see that illusion before I shatter it completely." The next morning, I met with my attorney, presenting the invitation and explaining everything I'd learned. Her response was immediate and definitive. "This is straightforward fraud," she said, reviewing the documents from the trust alongside the information Megan had gathered. "We can file for immediate eviction and pursue criminal charges." "I don't want criminal charges," I replied, surprising myself with the realization as I spoke. "At least, not yet. What I want is for them to understand exactly what they've done and what it means. I want this handled in a way that leaves no room for Daniel to rewrite the narrative afterward." My attorney nodded thoughtfully. "Then let's prepare everything but hold off on filing until after this housewarming. You'll attend, observe, and then we'll deliver formal notice of eviction and demands for restoration of any alterations made without the property owner's consent. That's you first thing Monday morning." The day of the housewarming arrived with perfect early autumn weather, the kind of crystalline September evening that showcases Cedar Grove at its most enchanting. I chose my outfit carefully. A simple black dress that Daniel had always said made me look elegant, paired with the pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. Nathan insisted on driving me, concerned about my emotional state. "I'm fine," I assured him as we approached the familiar winding driveway of Willow's Edge. "Really, I feel clear, focused." The cottage looked both familiar and strange as we pulled up. The exterior retained its historic charm, the distinctive green shutters, the wraparound porch, the stone path leading to the boathouse, but new landscaping had been installed, more manicured and formal than the naturalistic gardens my grandmother had cultivated. Modern outdoor lighting illuminated the walkway, and through the windows I could glimpse sleek furniture that seemed at odds with the cottage's traditional architecture. "Ready?" Nathan asked as we approached the front door, already open to welcome guests. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Completely. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. Walls had been removed to create an open-concept main floor, the original hardwood covered with trendy tile, and the cozy built-in bookcases replaced with minimalist floating shelves. The warm, intimate spaces I'd loved had been converted into a showplace that could have been lifted from a contemporary design magazine. Beautiful in its way, but devoid of the character and history that had made Willow's Edge special. Guests, clustered in small groups, drinking champagne and admiring the renovation. I recognized several faces from Daniel's firm, a few neighbors from the lake community. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And various members of Cedar Grove's business elite. Their expressions as they noticed me ranged from shock to discomfort to avid curiosity. Rachel! Daniel's voice cut through the ambient conversation as he approached, glass in hand, Olivia at his side. You came? I wasn't sure you would. He looked the same yet different, still handsome at 45, his dark hair now styled more fashionably, his casual designer clothes projecting effortless success. Beside him, Olivia was striking in a cream silk jumpsuit, her dark hair pulled back to showcase statement earrings, her expression shifting from surprise to a carefully composed smile. Daniel, Olivia. I nodded to each of them. Thank you for the invitation. I was intrigued. We wanted to maintain civilized relations, Daniel explained, his tone suggesting magnanimity. And to show you what we've done with the place. Remember how you always said this cottage had potential if someone was willing to invest in modernizing it? The barb was intentional, referencing conversations where I'd advocated for preserving the cottage's historic elements while Daniel had pushed for contemporary updates. I smiled tightly, taking a sip of the champagne a server had handed me. The changes are certainly dramatic, I replied, glancing around. You've made it your own. Olivia has an exceptional eye, Daniel said, squeezing his new wife's waist. She's transformed this old place completely. You should see what we've done with the master suite, Olivia added, her smile sharp. Daniel tells me it was quite basic before. The invitation to view their bedroom hung in the air, deliberately provocative. Several nearby guests shifted, uncomfortably. Perhaps another time, I said smoothly. I'm more interested in the structural changes. Those look significant. Daniel launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the renovations they'd made. Walls removed, the kitchen expanded, the sunroom winterized, plans for the boathouse conversion. With each detail, my internal calculator added up the thousands of dollars of unpermitted changes to my property, all undertaken without any legal right. As Daniel talked, I noticed Olivia studying me with increasing intensity, her perfect composure showing the first hints of uncertainty. I wondered how much she actually knew about the property's acquisition, how complicit she was in Daniel's deception. It's all quite impressive, I said when he finally paused. You've clearly invested considerable time and money. How did this purchase come about? I was under the impression the owner wasn't interested in selling. A flicker of something, wariness perhaps, crossed Daniel's face before his confident smile returned. Actually, it was quite straightforward. The holding company was looking to divest some properties after the economic downturn. Right place, right time. Olivia nodded, though I noticed her glance questioningly at Daniel. It was meant to be, she said. The moment Daniel showed me this place, I knew it was perfect for our fresh start. Fortune favors the bold, Daniel added, raising his glass slightly. Speaking of fortune, I said, keeping my tone conversational, have you met the neighbors? The Andersons have owned their property for nearly as long as this cottage has been in my family. The emphasis on The last 3 words was subtle but deliberate. Daniel's smile tightened fractionally, and Olivia's brow furrowed in confusion. "Your family," she repeated. "I thought this was owned by some corporate entity." "Cedar Lake Holdings," I confirmed with a nod. "Established by my grandmother to protect Willow's Edge, that's the cottage's actual name, and ensure it remained in our family. The trust makes me the beneficiary and sole person authorized to sell the property." The silence that followed was absolute. Nearby conversations faltered as guests became aware of the sudden tension. Daniel's face had drained of color, while Olivia looked between us in growing alarm. "What exactly are you saying?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm saying," I replied, meeting her gaze directly, "that whatever documents you think give you ownership of this property are fraudulent. Willow's Edge belongs to me. It always has, and it never stopped being mine." Daniel's glass nearly slipped from his hand. "Rachel, this isn't the place." "No," I agreed calmly. "It isn't. But since you've invited half of Cedar Grove to celebrate your illegal occupation of my property, it seemed an appropriate time to clarify the situation." Olivia's composure cracked completely. "Daniel, what is she talking about? You said the purchase was finalized months ago." Before he could respond, Nathan appeared at my side, his presence steady and reassuring. "Perhaps the 3 of you should continue this conversation privately," he suggested, nodding toward the curious onlookers. Daniel seized the suggestion immediately. "My office," he said tersely, gesturing toward what had once been my grandmother's study at the back of the house. Now, the room had been transformed into a sleek home office, my grandmother's antique desk replaced by a glass and steel monstrosity, her botanical prints swapped for abstract art. The only remaining original feature was the window seat overlooking the lake, where I'd spent countless hours reading as a child. "What kind of game are you playing?" Daniel demanded as soon as the door closed behind us, his controlled facade crumbling. "If this is some pathetic attempt to disrupt our life because you're still bitter about the divorce." "Stop," Olivia interrupted, her voice shaking. "Rachel, explain exactly what you mean about owning this house." I met her gaze, seeing genuine distress there. "Willow's Edge has been in my family for 4 generations. My grandmother left it to me in a trust, specifically structured to protect it from any claims, including marital assets. It's my separate property and always has been." "That's impossible," Daniel interjected. "The sale went through Cedar Lake Holdings." "I have the documentation." "Forged documentation," I corrected him. "The trust requires my signature for any sale, which I never provided. Whatever paperwork you created or obtained is fraudulent." Olivia sank into a chair, her face ashen. "You knew about this?" she asked Daniel, her voice barely audible. "You knew this house wasn't legitimately for sale?" For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely cornered. "It's more complicated than that. Rachel never mentioned the trust during our marriage. I only discovered Cedar Lake Holdings while organizing our financial documents for the divorce. I assumed it was an investment property we'd purchased together." "Don't lie," I said quietly. "Not now. You found the trust documents in my grandmother's papers when we were cleaning out her personal effects after she passed. You asked me about them specifically, and I explained the arrangement. You dismissed it as unnecessary complication and suggested we simplify our holdings." Olivia stood abruptly, moving away from Daniel. "So, you not only stole your ex-wife's property, but you've spent nearly $100,000 renovating a house we don't own? That we've invited everyone we know to see tonight?" The reality of their situation was dawning on her with brutal clarity. I almost felt sorry for her, caught in the collapse of Daniel's deception. "This is absurd," Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. "There must be some misunderstanding. Whatever outdated documents you're referring to, Rachel, the current deed is in our names." "No," I replied simply. It isn't. The property records still show Cedar Lake Holdings as the owner, with the trust as the controlling entity. My attorney has prepared formal eviction notices and demands for restoration of unpermitted renovations, which you'll receive Monday morning. You have 30 days to vacate. 30 days? Olivia repeated incredulously. We've just finished. Renovations. Our entire life is here now. A life built on fraud, Nathan pointed out from where he stood by the door. Daniel's expression hardened as the full implications sank in. You won't get away with this. I'll fight you in court. By the time my attorneys are finished, you'll be lucky if you can still afford that downtown loft. The threat might once have intimidated me, but now I simply found it sad. The desperate posturing of a man whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling. You're welcome to pursue litigation, I said calmly. Though I should mention that fraudulent property acquisition carries potential criminal penalties in this state. I've chosen not to involve the authorities at this point, but that could change. The color drained from Daniel's face as the reality of his legal vulnerability became clear. 15 years in architecture and development had taught him enough about property law to recognize the precariousness of his position. Olivia had moved to the window seat, as far from Daniel as the room allowed, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. When did you know? She asked him, her voice hollow. Before or after we started renovations? His hesitation before answering told her everything. She stood abruptly, her composure returning in a cold, brittle way. I see. You'll have to excuse me. Apparently, I need to address our guests regarding a misunderstanding about our living situation. Olivia, wait, Daniel started, but she was already moving toward the door. I'll handle this, Daniel, she said with quiet fury, since you've proven completely incapable of dealing honestly with either your ex-wife or your current one. As she left, slamming the door behind her, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Daniel stared after her, his expression shifting between anger and desperation. You've ruined everything, he said finally, turning back to me. Are you satisfied now? I considered the question seriously, searching my feelings. There was no jubilation, no vindictive pleasure in watching his distress, only a quiet certainty that justice was being served. This isn't about satisfaction, Daniel. It's about truth. You took something that didn't belong to you, lied to everyone involved, and expected no consequences. That's not how the world works. This cottage was always wasted on you, he said bitterly. You kept it as a rental. Property for years, when we could have been living here, developing it to its full potential. It wasn't wasted, I replied. It was preserved. And I had plans for it. Plans that included you once. I was going to surprise you on our 20th anniversary with the news that we could renovate and move in together. The revelation visibly stunned him. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I'd married, capable of genuine emotion, of regret. Then his expression hardened again. Sentimental nonsense, he muttered. Completely impractical. Nathan, who had remained silent throughout, much of the exchange, finally spoke. We should go, Rachel. I think everything that needs to be said has been said. He was right. There was nothing more to accomplish by prolonging this confrontation. Daniel would receive the legal documents Monday morning, and the process of reclaiming Willow's edge would proceed through proper channels. As we moved toward the door, shouts from the main room indicated that Olivia was indeed addressing the situation with their guests. The party was clearly ending prematurely, confused voices and hurried movements suggesting a mass exodus. 30 days, Daniel, I said, pausing at the doorway. I expect the property to be vacated in the conditions specified by the legal notice. After that, we have nothing more to discuss. Outside, guests were hurriedly departing, awkward goodbyes and shocked whispers creating a surreal atmosphere. Olivia stood in the center of the now empty living room, her perfect composure reassembled, though her eyes blazed with cold fury. She looked up as we entered, her gaze focused entirely on me. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I knew nothing about this. I would never have participated in stealing someone's family property, regardless of the circumstances. I believed her." The shock and betrayal in her expression had been too raw, too genuine to be feigned. "I know," I replied simply. She nodded once, a curt acknowledgement, then turned away to deal with the few remaining guests. As Nathan and I walked out onto the porch, the cool evening air felt cleansing after the emotional intensity inside. "Are you okay?" Nathan asked as we made our way down the stone path toward his car. I paused, looking back at the cottage silhouetted against the deepening twilight, Cedar Lake shimmering beyond it. Despite the dramatic confrontation, despite the shock of seeing my family home so altered, I felt strangely at peace. "Yes," I said, realizing it was true. "I really am." The legal process that followed was surprisingly straightforward. Daniel, recognizing the indefensibility of his position, did not contest the eviction. Olivia moved out within a week, leaving Daniel to handle the logistics of their separation from Willow's Edge. My attorney negotiated a settlement covering restoration of the unpermitted changes, which Daniel agreed to rather than face potential criminal charges for document fraud. 3 months after the disastrous housewarming party, I stood once again on the porch of Willow's Edge, this time with the keys firmly in my possession. The cottage had been restored to its original configuration where possible, though some of the modernizations, an updated kitchen, improved electrical systems, remained as practical improvements. "What will you do with it now?" Nathan asked, helping me carry boxes from his car. "I decided to move in permanently, leaving my downtown loft for a place with deeper roots and meaning." "Live here," I said simply. "Create the home I always wanted. Maybe set up a proper photography studio in the boathouse." He nodded, understanding the significance of the decision. "It suits you, you know. This place, it always has." Later that evening, after Nathan had left and I was alone with the familiar creaking sounds of the cottage settling for the night, I sat in the window seat with a glass of wine, watching moonlight play across the lake. The journey from devastation to reclamation had been neither quick nor easy, but sitting there in the home that generations of my family had loved, I felt a sense of completion. Daniel's betrayal had broken more than our marriage. It had shattered my trust, my confidence, my sense of direction. Yet through the process of reclaiming what was rightfully mine, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The sigh. Cottage was mine again, yes, but more importantly, so was my life, shaped by my choices, aligned with my values, no longer defined by someone else's narrative. As autumn deepened into winter, Willow's Edge welcomed me home each day, its solid presence a reminder that some things, once truly owned, can never really be taken away. If this story touched you, in any way, please take a moment to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means everything to us, and we have many more powerful stories of resilience and unexpected justice coming your way. Together, we can celebrate the strength that emerges when we stand firm in our truth, even when facing life's most difficult betrayals. The black car glided to a stop as I stepped outside Willow's Edge, its tinted windows reflecting the warm glow of lights from the housewarming party I'd just escaped. Fallen maple leaves crunched beneath my heels, their rust and gold colors mirroring the sunset over Cedar Lake. In the distance, the hills stood dark against the evening sky, their familiar silhouette a constant in a life that had become anything but predictable. "Rough night?" Nathan asked as he opened the passenger door for me, his voice carrying the gentle understanding that had become my anchor these past 6 months. I slipped into the leather seat and exhaled slowly, feeling the tension begin to drain from my shoulders. You have no idea. As we pulled away from the curb, I watched the cottage recede in the side mirror, all white clapboard and green shutters, windows blazing with light. So beautiful, and yet now tainted by Daniel and Olivia's presence. The house I'd dreamed of. Sharing with Daniel was now the showcase for my replacement. Did he invite you just to rub it in? Nathan asked. His hands relaxed on the steering wheel despite the edge in his voice. That, and to announce their engagement, I replied, turning away from the mirror to face forward. Apparently they're getting married on the lakefront next spring. Nathan's soft whistle carried both sympathy and disbelief. That's cold, even for Daniel. He always did know exactly where to twist the knife. We drove in comfortable silence through the winding roads of Riverside Heights, the exclusive neighborhood that had once intimidated me with its old money and quiet elegance. Now, having spent 15 years as Mrs. Daniel Bennett, I knew the truth behind many of these pristine facades, the affairs carefully hidden, fortunes quietly dwindling, appearances desperately maintained. Riverside Heights was a beautiful veneer over complicated lives, not unlike my marriage had been. Your timing was perfect, I said finally, glancing at Nathan. One more minute in there, and I might have caused a scene. He smiled, the corner of his eyes crinkling in that way that always made me feel understood. Rachel Wilson doesn't do scenes, he replied, using my maiden name with deliberate care. She executes plans. The use of Wilson instead of Bennett felt both strange and right. 6 months after the divorce, I was still adjusting to reclaiming pieces of my former identity. Speaking of plans, Nathan continued as the streetlights illuminated his profile. Megan reviewed all the documentation and says it's airtight. Daniel won't know what hit him. The headlights illuminated the road ahead as we left the residential area behind, cutting through Riverwood Park that separated Riverside Heights from downtown Cedar Grove. This stretch of road had always been my favorite, a momentary escape into darkness and wilderness before the city lights appeared on the horizon. Do you think I'm being vindictive? I asked, voicing the doubt that had been needling me for weeks. Part of me wonders if I should just let them have the cottage and move on with my life. Nathan considered this before answering, his profile, thoughtful in the dim light of the dashboard. After what I saw tonight? No, I don't think you're being vindictive. I think you're finally standing up for yourself. I turned to stare out the window, watching the tall pine trees blur past. Monday would change everything, and despite my resolve, a heavy weight of memories pressed against my chest. It wasn't always bad, you know, I said softly. Our marriage. There were good years before everything changed. Nathan nodded, understanding in his silence. As Daniel's former business partner and my oldest friend, he'd witnessed both the rise and fall of our relationship firsthand. The problem with long marriages that end badly, he replied after a moment, is that the pain of the ending can poison the memory of everything that came before. The truth of his words settled over me as the trees thinned and the first buildings of downtown Cedar Grove came into view. The city at night was a modest but lovely sight. Historic brick buildings juxtaposed with sleek modern additions, all reflected in the calm waters of the lake that gave the town its name. Do you remember? I said as we approached the water. That summer when Daniel and I first moved back here from Chicago? We were so young, living in that tiny apartment above Hartman's Gallery. Nathan smiled. I remember you used to have dinner parties on that ridiculously small balcony. 5 people crammed around a card table, drinking cheap wine and planning how we were going to change the world. Those were good days, I murmured. Before Daniel joined his father's firm, before the Bennett legacy became more important than anything else. We pulled up to my building, the Overlook, an elegant pre-war apartment complex that had been converted into luxury lofts a decade ago. Daniel had bought our unit as an investment property, insisting that downtown was up and coming. When we divorced, he'd been so eager to liquidate assets before the settlement that he'd practically given me the loft just to finalize things quickly. Little had he known that it would triple in value within 4 years as Cedar Grove underwent a renaissance, becoming one of the most desirable small cities in the state. "What time tomorrow?" I asked, as Nathan pulled under the portico. 10 sharp. I'll pick you up at 9:30. I nodded, gathering my purse and the remnants of my dignity. "Thank you for coming to get me tonight. I don't know what I would have done if I'd had to call a rideshare from that party." "That's what friends are for," he replied, his gaze holding mine for a beat longer than necessary. "Besides, someone needs to be there to witness the look on Daniel's face tomorrow when he realizes what's happening." The doorman opened my car door with a polite nod. "Good evening, Ms. Wilson." "Evening, Frank," I replied, stepping out into the cool night air. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of Cabernet, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the lake. Despite its modest size compared to Willow's Edge, this space felt more like home than any place I'd lived in years. Here, surrounded by artwork I'd selected, furniture chosen for comfort rather than impression, books I actually read rather than displayed, I had rediscovered parts of myself that had slowly disappeared during my marriage. The quiet photographer who preferred small galleries to charity galas, the amateur chef who could spend an entire Sunday experimenting with recipes, the woman who could lose herself in a novel without feeling guilty about wasting time. I sipped my wine and watched the moonlight ripple across the dark water, thinking about the path that had led me here. 15 years with Daniel, slowly molding myself to fit the expectations of being a Bennett, gradually giving up pieces of my identity until one day I'd looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Then 6 months ago, the phone call that had shattered everything. "I need a change, Rachel. I've met someone else. I won't be home when you return." 15 years ended in less than 30 seconds. I'd later learn he'd been seeing Olivia for over a year, that colleagues had known, that some of our friends had suspected, that I was apparently the last to know. But tomorrow, Daniel would discover that I'd learned a few things during our marriage, that I'd been paying attention during all those dinner conversations with his father about property law, that I'd been more than just an ornamental wife at those business meetings. Tomorrow he would learn that sometimes the past catches up in ways you least expect. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. "To closure," I whispered, and took another sip of wine. The text I'd received at the party glowed on my phone screen, still open on the coffee table. "Documents delivered to clerk. Filing confirmed for 9 a.m. Everything ready for tomorrow." And beneath it, my attorney's final words. "After tomorrow, the cottage will officially be back in your name. Legally, they'll have 30 days to vacate. Life has a way of teaching us its most important lessons through our deepest wounds. Sometimes we find our true strength only after everything we thought was solid crumbles beneath our feet. And sometimes justice arrives not as a thunderous declaration, but as a quiet document signed in an office on an ordinary Monday morning." I woke before my alarm, the pale autumn sunlight filtering through my curtains. For the first time in months, I felt rested, clear-headed, purposeful. Today wasn't about revenge, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction I anticipated. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, not just a cottage, but my sense of self-worth. As I showered and dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored navy pantsuit that Daniel had always complained made me look too severe, I thought about all the women who had found themselves in similar positions, discarded after years of sacrifice and support, replaced by younger versions as if we were appliances that had outlived our warranty period, made to feel as though our best years were behind us, while our husbands embarked on second acts with fresh-faced partners. Society had a script for women like me: graceful retreat into bitterness or desperate attempts to compete with our replacements. Few expected us to rise, to reclaim, to rebuild something better than what we had lost. I applied my makeup with precision, something I'd stopped doing in the final years of my marriage, when Daniel seemed to stop seeing me altogether. My reflection looked back at me with clear eyes and a determined set to my jaw. I hardly recognized this woman, and yet she felt more authentic than the person I'd been for years. The doorbell rang precisely at 9:30. Nathan stood in the hallway holding 2 to-go cups from the Daily Grind, the local cafe where we'd taken to meeting weekly since the divorce. "You look like a woman about to close a deal," he said, handing me a cup. "Isn't that exactly what I'm doing?" I replied, accepting the coffee with a smile. The drive to the courthouse was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I watched the town roll by outside my window, the bakery where Daniel and I used to buy Sunday morning pastries, the park where we'd once discussed having children someday, the movie theater where we'd had our first date back when we were just college students home for summer break. So many memories embedded in these streets, both sweet and painful. "You know," Nathan said as we stopped at a red light, "what you're doing today, it isn't just about the cottage." I turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "It's about making right something that's been wrong for a long time," he continued, keeping his eyes on the road, but his voice carrying a quiet intensity. "Daniel has always taken what didn't belong to him and acted like it was his birthright. The cottage is just the most recent example." The light turned green and we continued toward the courthouse, Nathan's words settling over me, resonating with a truth I hadn't fully acknowledged for years. Daniel had taken credit for my ideas at dinner parties, spoken over me in conversations, made decisions that affected us both without consulting me. The pattern had been there all along, but I'd been too in love, too committed to our marriage to recognize it. "When did you know?" I asked. "That Daniel wasn't the person I thought he was?" Nathan was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "Do you remember the Westlake project? About 5 years ago?" I nodded. The Westlake development had been a significant architectural commission, one that had cemented Daniel's reputation as a rising star in his father's firm. "That was originally your concept," Nathan continued. "You mentioned it over dinner one night, converting that old waterfront warehouse into mixed-use spaces with artist studios above local businesses. You had sketched it all out, talking about community impact and sustainable design. 3 weeks later, Daniel presented it to the firm as his own idea." I finished the memory, suddenly crystal clear. When I mentioned it, he said he'd given me full credit in the meeting. "He hadn't," Nathan said simply. "In fact, he made a point of telling everyone he'd come up with it despite your amateur suggestions." The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it still stung. How many other times had he taken from me while convincing me I'd been given credit? How many of his accomplishments had actually been built on ideas he'd appropriated? "The cottage is different, though," I said after a moment. "This time I have documentation, proof." We pulled into the courthouse parking lot, a stately building of red brick and white columns that housed both county offices and courtrooms. My attorney, Lisa Chen, was waiting on the steps, a slim leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Ready?" she asked as we approached. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do this." Inside, the process was remarkably anticlimactic for something that would change so many lives. A clerk verified my identification, reviewed the documentation one final time, and applied the necessary stamps and signatures. In less than 30 minutes, ownership of Willow's Edge was officially transferred back into my name. "Congratulations," Lisa said, handing me a copy of the filed deed. "The property is now legally yours again. The notification will be delivered to the current occupants today, and they'll have 30 days to vacate unless other arrangements are made." I stared down at the document, tracing my fingertip over my name printed in official text. After all the pain and humiliation, after months of meticulous preparation and patience, justice had arrived in the form of a simple legal document. "What happens now?" Nathan asked as we walked back to his car. Now, I said, tucking the papers carefully into my bag. We deliver the news in person. The drive to Riverside Heights was fraught with a tension that hadn't been there before. What had been abstract was now concrete. The cottage was mine, and soon Daniel and Olivia would know it. I found myself wondering how they would react. What expressions would cross their faces when they realized what had happened? "Are you nervous?" Nathan asked as we turned onto the tree-lined street where Willow's edge stood. "Oddly, no," I replied, realizing it was true. I feel resolved, like something that's been out of alignment for years is finally clicking back into place. As we approached the cottage, I thought about all the women watching stories like mine unfold, in online forums, in quiet conversations, over coffee, in support groups. Women whose husbands had disappeared into midlife crises and emerged with younger partners, leaving decades of shared life in ruins. Women who had been told to accept their losses gracefully, to not make waves, to move on without making a fuss. This moment wasn't just for me. It was for all of us who had been discarded and deceived, who had rebuilt ourselves from the broken, pieces left behind. It was proof that sometimes justice arrives late, but arrives nonetheless. That sometimes the story doesn't end with the heartbreak, but continues into something unexpected and empowering. "Here we are," Nathan said, pulling up to the curb in front of Willow's edge. I looked up at the cottage that Daniel had once deemed too traditional, but had eagerly claimed after our divorce, the cottage that would soon be returned to me along with a measure of justice I hadn't dared hope for 6 months ago. "Let's go deliver the news," I said, stepping out of the car with the quiet confidence of a woman who was, at long last, reclaiming what was hers. The path to the front door seemed both longer and shorter than I remembered. Autumn had transformed the landscaping since my last visit, painting the maple trees in brilliant crimson and scattering golden leaves across the herringbone brick walkway, a walkway I had designed during the countless hours I'd spent imagining living in this cottage back when it was just a dream Daniel had dismissed. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 15 years, I had been the practical one in our marriage, the planner, the one who researched investments, who saved for our future, who thought about the long game while Daniel focused on immediate gratification. I had been the one to suggest setting aside money each month in a separate account for something special someday, I'd told him. Daniel had nodded absently, trusting me to handle the finances as he always did, too busy climbing the ladder at his father's firm to concern himself with such details. He never asked how much we were saving or where exactly the money was going. His trust had been both a gift and his undoing, because that separate account, the one that had grown steadily over the years, was in my name only. And when the opportunity came to quietly purchase Willow's Edge 5 years ago, when the previous tenants were looking to break their lease, I had seized it, intending it as a surprise for our 20th anniversary. A surprise that would never come. "You okay?" Nathan asked, his steady presence beside me a reminder that I wasn't facing this moment alone. "I'm fine," I replied, surprised to find it was true. The anxiety I had expected to feel was nowhere to be found, just a calm certainty. Just remembering. We reached the grand oak door with its original stained glass insets. Another feature I had fallen in love with years ago. I pressed the doorbell and heard the same melodic chime echo through the foyer inside. The sound transported me back to the first time I'd toured this cottage, envisioning holiday gatherings and quiet Sunday mornings in its gracious rooms. Footsteps approached, and the door swung open to reveal a young woman in a maid's uniform, something that made me blink in surprise. Daniel and I had never employed household staff during our marriage, despite his family's suggestions that it was expected for someone of his position. "May I help you?" she asked politely, though her expression suggested she recognized me from the party the night before. "I'm here to see Daniel," I said. "Is he available?" She hesitated, clearly uncertain about the protocol for admitting the ex-wife. "One moment, please." As she disappeared into the house, I caught Nathan's eye. "A maid?" I mouthed silently. He raised an eyebrow. Apparently, Olivia has different standards. Before I could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from irritation to surprise to wariness in quick succession. He was wearing casual attire, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, his version of a relaxed Monday at home. "Rachel," he said, making no move to invite us in. "Twice in 24 hours. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "We have some business to discuss," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "May we come in?" His gaze flicked to Nathan, narrowing slightly. The two had once been close friends and business partners before Nathan had left the firm following my divorce from Daniel, a departure that had deepened the rift between them. "What kind of business?" Daniel asked, suspicion evident in his voice. "The kind best discussed in private," Nathan replied evenly. After a moment of obvious internal debate, Daniel stepped back, gesturing us into the foyer with reluctance. "Olivia is at Pilates," he said, as if warning us not to get comfortable. "She'll be back soon." "Perfect," I said. "She should hear this too." The foyer opened into a grand living room where crystal vases now held expensive floral arrangements, and new artwork adorned the walls. All sleek modern pieces that clashed with the cottage's traditional character. I recognized Olivia's influence immediately. These were exactly the kind of status symbol acquisitions she would favor. Daniel led us into what had once been my grandmother's study, but had apparently been converted into a home office. Heavy oak shelving still lined the walls, but now they displayed awards and photos of Daniel with local celebrities and politicians rather than books. His massive desk dominated the space, positioned to take advantage of the view of the lake, through the bay window. "What's this about?" he asked, not offering us seats but taking his place behind the desk like a king granting an audience. "The cottage," I said simply. He frowned. "What about it?" "Do you remember," I began, moving to examine a framed photo on the shelf as if we were having a casual conversation. "When we first looked at this property 7 years ago, you said it was too traditional, too much maintenance. A charming relic, I believe were your exact words." Daniel's frown deepened. "Is that why you're here? To remind me that my taste has evolved? People change, Rachel. They grow." "They certainly do," I agreed, turning to face him directly. "Some change from devoted. Husbands into men who end 15-year marriages with a 30-second phone call." His jaw tightened. "If you came here to rehash our divorce—" "I didn't," I interrupted calmly. "I came to discuss the ownership of this cottage." Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion quickly masked. "The ownership? What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, we heard the front door open and close, followed by the sound of Olivia's voice calling out to Daniel. Moments later, she appeared in the doorway, still in her designer athleisure wear, a luxury yoga mat tucked under one arm. Her expression shifted from surprise to poorly concealed hostility when she saw us. "I didn't realize we had company," she said, her tone making it clear we were unwelcome. "They were just leaving," Daniel replied, standing from his desk. "Actually," Nathan said, "we have some important information to share with both of you." Olivia moved to stand beside Daniel, her hand possessively on his shoulder. The gesture was deliberate, a visual reminder of her place in his life now. "What information?" she asked, wariness edging her perfect composure. I reached into my bag and removed the folder containing the property documents, placing it on Daniel's desk without opening it. "Do you know who owns this cottage, Daniel?" He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "What kind of question is that?" "I do, obviously." "Actually," I said quietly, "you don't. You never did." The momentary silence that followed was absolute. What are you talking about? Olivia demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. We bought this cottage 4 months ago, Daniel added, his confidence unwavering. No, I corrected gently. You didn't. Whatever paperwork you think gives you ownership of this property is fraudulent. Willow's edge belongs to me. Daniel's face had gone very still, a muscle working in his jaw as the implications began to dawn on him. What does this have to do with you? He asked, though I could tell by his expression that he was beginning to piece it together. I purchased Willow's Edge 5 years ago, I said. Through Cedar Grove Heritage Properties, a company I established specifically to acquire this cottage without anyone knowing, including you. Olivia looked between us, confusion evident. That's impossible. The real estate agent, Megan. Reynolds, I interrupted. She's a friend of mine. She helped me structure the purchase through the LLC to keep it anonymous. Daniel's face had drained of color. You're lying, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. In response, I opened the folder on his desk, revealing the original deed, the LLC formation documents with my name clearly listed as the sole owner, and the most damning evidence of all, a copy of the fake documents he had created to make it appear he'd purchased the property from my company. You used my company letterhead, I said softly. You forged my signature as the LLC owner. You created fraudulent transfer documents. You presented these to the tenants, to the neighbors, to everyone who's visited this cottage since you moved in, pretending you had purchased it legally. The evidence laid bare on his desk was irrefutable. I watched as understanding and fury dawned in his eyes. You set me up, he snarled. No, Daniel, I corrected him. I purchased a cottage I loved 5 years ago, using money I had saved over the course of our marriage. Money you never bothered to ask about. When Megan told me a couple wanted to rent it, I agreed. I had no idea it was you until the documents with your forged signature crossed my desk. Olivia snatched up the papers, her eyes scanning the text frantically. This can't be legal, she said, her voice rising. We renovated this place. We've invested thousands. You made unauthorized modifications to a property you're illegally occupying, Nathan clarified. That's not an investment, it's property damage. Richard slammed his fist on the desk, making us all jump. This is about revenge. You're doing this to punish me. I met his gaze calmly. No, Daniel. This is about ownership. The cottage is mine. It always has been. This is ridiculous, Olivia said, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. You can't just show up and claim our home is yours. We have rights. You're right, I replied calmly, is to occupy the property until the lease termination, which I've initiated today. The notification has been officially filed. You have 30 days to vacate. Daniel's face had transformed, the shock giving way to the cold, calculating expression I'd seen countless times during our marriage when he felt cornered. It was the same look he wore when preparing to undermine an opponent, assessing weaknesses, planning his counterattack. You won't get away with this, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You think you've been clever, but you've just started a war you can't win. Nathan stepped forward slightly. Everything has been done legally, Daniel. The property was purchased legitimately. The fraud was on your part, and the termination follows all state laws. You're welcome to challenge it, but you'll lose and potentially face criminal charges for document fraud. Daniel's attention shifted to Nathan, his eyes narrowing. So this is why you left the firm. You were helping her plan this all along. I left the firm because I didn't like what you were becoming, Nathan replied evenly. Rachel approached me about this only after she discovered what you'd done. Olivia had begun pacing, her perfect yoga outfit and sleek ponytail at odds with her rapidly deteriorating composure. This is insane. We've already started additional renovations. We've invited people to our wedding here. I'm aware, I said. I was at your housewarming party last night, remember? when you made a point of showing off how perfectly your life was going without me. Daniel's expression darkened further. Is that what this is about? You're bitter about the divorce, so you concocted this scheme to humiliate us? No, Daniel, I replied, my voice steady despite the accusation. This is about ownership and consequences. The cottage was mine before you ever moved in. I purchased it 5 years ago as an investment, intending it as a surprise for our 20th anniversary. I allowed myself a small, sad smile. Obviously, that didn't work out as planned. This revelation seemed to stun him momentarily. For a brief instant, something like regret flickered across his features before being quickly suppressed. You expect me to believe that? He scoffed. That this was going to be some grand romantic gesture? Believe what you want, I replied. The legal reality remains the same. The cottage is mine, and I've terminated your occupancy. Olivia stopped pacing to stare at me, her perfect features contorted with fury. You, vindictive. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching us squirm? Careful, Olivia, Nathan warned quietly. This conversation is already tense enough. She whirled on him. Oh, I see how it is now. You two are together, aren't you? Planning this ambush, laughing behind our backs. Nathan is my friend, I said firmly. One of the few who stood by me when Daniel decided our 15-year marriage wasn't worth fighting for. Daniel pushed away from his desk, coming to stand directly in front of me. Though he didn't touch me, his physical presence was deliberately intimidating, a tactic he'd used subtly throughout our marriage when arguments weren't going his way. Let me make something very clear, he said, his voice low and controlled. I will fight this. I will tie you up in litigation for years. By the time I'm done, whatever satisfaction you think you're getting today will have cost you everything. I didn't step back, though every instinct urged me to create distance. Instead, I held my ground, meeting his gaze steadily. You're welcome to try, but unlike during our marriage, I'm not intimidated by your legal threats anymore. You should be, he responded. You have no idea what I'm capable of when someone crosses me. Actually, I do, I countered. I watched. You destroy competitors for 15 years. I saw how you celebrated ruining careers over dinner, treating other people's misfortunes as professional victories. That's why I planned this so carefully, because I know exactly what you're capable of. Olivia had moved to Daniel's side, her hand on his arm as if physically restraining him. There must be some arrangement we can come to, she said, her tone abruptly shifting to something more conciliatory. A fair market purchase, perhaps. We're prepared to be generous. The sudden pivot to negotiation didn't surprise me. It was exactly what Daniel had taught her. When intimidation fails, switch to bargaining. The property isn't for sale, I replied. Not to you. Everyone has a price, she insisted, the desperation seeping through her polished veneer. Name yours. I considered her for a moment. This woman who had knowingly entered into an affair with my husband, who had moved into what she thought was his cottage, who had invited me to witness their happiness with the explicit intention of making me feel inferior. There isn't enough money in the world, Olivia. Daniel's jaw clenched. This is because of her, isn't it? You don't care about the cottage. You just want to punish me for choosing her. The accusation was so wildly off base that I actually laughed, a short, incredulous sound that seemed to startle them both. Daniel, this may come as a shock to your ego, but this isn't about you or your girlfriend. This is about a cottage I fell in love with and purchased with my own money 5 years ago. I gestured around the room. A cottage, I might add, that you initially wanted nothing to do with until it suited your new image. You've changed, he said, as if this were an accusation rather than an observation. You're right, I agreed. The Rachel you knew, the one who accommodated your every demand, who made herself smaller to fit into your world, who continuously forgave your selfish behavior. She doesn't exist anymore. You destroyed her when you threw away 15 years like it meant nothing. Something in my words seemed to land harder than I'd intended. For a brief moment, Daniel looked genuinely shaken, as if seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time since our divorce. Olivia, however, had recovered her composure and shifted to attack mode. So what happens now? You throw us out on the street? Congratulations on your petty victory. You have 30 days as specified in the lease termination. I replied evenly. That's standard procedure and more than generous considering the circumstances. And then what? Daniel demanded. You move in here by yourself? Turn it into some shrine to our failed marriage? I smiled slightly. What I do with my property is no longer any of your concern, Daniel. Daniel stared at me, his expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. In that moment, I realized how completely the man I had loved had vanished, replaced by someone calculating and cruel. This isn't over, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. Actually, it is, Nathan interjected, stepping forward. The legal documentation is ironclad. You committed fraud. Be grateful Rachel isn't pressing charges. The tension in the room was palpable, a physical force pressing against my skin. Daniel's eyes had taken on that dangerous glint I recognized. From his most contentious business negotiations, the look that meant he was preparing to destroy an opponent, regardless of the cost. You have no idea what you've started, he said, his voice deceptively calm. I made you, Rachel. Everything you are, everything you have, it all came from me and my family. The statement hung in the air between us, so fundamentally wrong, yet so perfectly encapsulating the way he had always viewed our relationship. In his mind, I had been an extension of himself, a beneficiary of his generosity rather than an equal partner. That's not true, I replied, keeping my voice steady, despite the surge of anger his words provoked. I brought my own education, my own talent, my own career to our marriage. I gave up my position at the gallery to support your advancement. I managed our home, our social calendar, your parents' care when they were ill. I was your partner, not your creation. He dismissed this with a wave of his hand. Revisionist history. You were a junior photographer at a third-rate gallery when we met. My father gave you connections. My name gave you status. Nathan shifted beside me, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. This isn't productive. Daniel. Stay out of this, Daniel snapped. This is between me and my wife. Ex-wife, I corrected quietly. Not even that for much longer if you continue with this absurd charade, he threatened, leaning forward. I'll have my legal team review our divorce settlement. We'll claim fraud, concealment of assets. By the time I'm done, you'll be lucky if you have enough left for a studio apartment. The threat should have terrified me. A year ago, it would have. Daniel was not just a skilled architect. He was the son of a prominent developer, a man with deep connections throughout the business community in our region. His firm represented half the power players in Cedar Grove. On paper, the balance of power was entirely in his favor. But paper didn't tell the whole story. You're forgetting something important, Daniel, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I kept meticulous records during our entire marriage, including documentation of the separate property funds I used to purchase this cottage, money that was explicitly excluded from our community property in the prenuptial agreement your father insisted I sign. Daniel's expression faltered slightly. The prenup had been his family's idea, designed to protect the Bennett assets from me should our marriage fail. In their desire to shield their son from a potential gold digger, they had inadvertently created the very legal structure that now protected my ownership of Willow's Edge. That prenup was never meant to protect you from me, he said, his voice tight with anger. It wasn't, I finished for him. No, it wasn't. But legal documents don't care. About intentions, Daniel, you taught me that. Vanessa, who had been watching our exchange with increasing alarm, stepped forward. There must be something we can do, she said, her tone shifting to one of calculated reason. Some arrangement that would be mutually beneficial. I'm listening, I replied, though I had no intention of negotiating. She glanced at Daniel before continuing. Daniel has connections that could be valuable to you. Perhaps we could discuss a more favorable time frame for vacating the property in exchange for certain considerations. What kind of considerations? I asked, curious to see how far they would go. Professional introductions, social reinstatement, she offered, as if these were generous concessions rather than the very things Daniel had systematically stripped from me during our divorce. Perhaps even a position with the Historic Preservation Committee he chairs? I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. You think I want Daniel's approval? His connections? After he spent the last 6 months telling everyone who would listen that I was emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible, Daniel at least had the decency to look uncomfortable at this direct reference to the narrative he'd crafted about our divorce. That was unfortunate, he conceded, offering no actual apology. Heat of the moment during a difficult transition. A transition you created by having an affair with your colleague, I pointed out. A colleague who is now offering me table scraps of social acceptance in exchange for the cottage that legally belongs to me. Olivia flushed with anger. I was trying to be reasonable, but clearly reasonableness isn't your strong suit. On the contrary, Nathan interjected. Rachel has been extremely reasonable throughout this process. She could have exposed your fraudulent documents at your housewarming party last night in front of all your guests. Instead, she's addressing this privately and giving you the legally required notice period. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he focused on Nathan. You've been behind this from the beginning, haven't you? Turned her against me? Filled her head with ideas about getting even. The accusation was so typical of Daniel, unable to believe I could make decisions independently, unwilling to accept that I might have agency separate from male influence. Nathan has been a friend, I said firmly. Something you apparently never were, even during our marriage. Daniel's face darkened. 15 years together, and this is how you repay my loyalty? By humiliating me? By threatening the home I'm creating with Olivia? The sheer audacity of his claim to loyalty momentarily stunned me into silence. It was Nathan who responded, his voice tight with barely contained anger. Loyalty? You ended your marriage with a phone call, Daniel. You were sleeping with another woman for a year before you bothered to tell Rachel it was over. You leveraged your connections to isolate her socially and professionally after the divorce, and now you have the nerve to talk about loyalty? Daniel's jaw tightened, a muscle working visibly at his temple. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know everything about it, Nathan countered. I was there for all of it. The holidays, the anniversaries, the dinner parties. I watched you gradually erode Rachel's confidence, take credit for her ideas, dismiss her concerns. I saw how you treated her when you thought no one was looking. The room fell silent. Even Olivia seemed taken aback by the rawness in Nathan's voice, the accumulated frustration of years spent witnessing what he'd been powerless to stop. Why? Do you even care? Daniel finally asked, his tone suspicious. What's your stake in this? Nathan shook his head, a gesture of disbelief rather than denial. Because unlike you, some people actually value friendship. Some people recognize worth that isn't tied to professional advancement or social standing. The implication hung heavy in the air that Daniel had never truly seen me, had never valued me for myself rather than what I contributed to his image and comfort. Olivia, perhaps sensing that the conversation was spiraling beyond her control, attempted to redirect. This isn't getting us anywhere. The fact remains that we've made this cottage our home. We've invested in renovations, planned our future here. Renovations you had no right to make, I pointed out. On a property you were fraudulently occupying, not owning. We were misled, she insisted, her voice rising. No, I corrected, gently. You didn't read the paperwork. There's a difference. Daniel's expression had shifted from anger to something more calculating. I recognized this look too, the moment when he pivoted strategies after realizing his initial approach had failed. Rachel, he said, his voice suddenly softer, almost intimate. I know things ended badly between us. I handled it poorly, and for that, I apologize. But this, he gestured around us, this isn't you. You're not vindictive. You're not cruel. The attempt at manipulation was so transparent that I almost pitied him. This isn't about vindictiveness, Daniel. It's about reclaiming what's mine, a cottage I purchased years ago with my own money because I loved it. The fact that you happen to be living in it now is an ironic coincidence, nothing more. Nobody will believe that, Olivia interjected. Everyone will see this for exactly what it is, a bitter ex-wife's revenge plot. I turned to her, suddenly weary of the circular conversation. What everyone thinks stopped mattering to me the day I received a phone call ending my 15-year marriage. I've spent the last 6 months rebuilding my life while you've been redecorating my cottage. Your opinions, your judgments, your social circle, none of it matters to me anymore. The stark truth of my words seemed to land with unexpected force. For perhaps the first time, Daniel and Olivia appeared to realize that the power dynamics they had taken for granted, his social standing, her youthful confidence, their united front against the discarded ex-wife, held no sway over me any longer. The fundamental imbalance they had counted on no longer existed. Olivia recovered first, her posture straightening as she recalibrated her approach. You know what? Fine. Keep the cottage if it means that much to you. We'll find something better, bigger, newer, with none of these outdated features you seem so attached to. Her dismissive tone made it clear she was attempting to salvage some dignity from the situation, to pretend the cottage had never really mattered to them anyway. But the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. That's certainly your prerogative, I replied evenly. You have 30 days to locate your upgrade. Daniel had gone very still, his lawyer's mind clearly processing options, calculating risks and potential counter-strategies. When he finally spoke, his voice had taken on the dangerous smoothness I recognized from his negotiations with difficult clients. Tell me something, Rachel. How long have you been planning this? Did you purchase this cottage knowing someday you'd use it against me? Was our entire marriage just a long game to you? The accusation was so wildly disconnected from reality that I might have laughed if the pain behind it weren't so evident. Even now, Daniel couldn't conceive of a world where my actions weren't somehow about him, where I might have made decisions for myself rather than in reaction to him. I bought this cottage 5 years ago because I loved it, I replied quietly. Because I saw the potential in it that you couldn't or wouldn't see. It was going to be a surprise for our 20th anniversary, a place where we could start a new chapter together. I paused, the old grief momentarily catching in my throat. Obviously, you had other plans for our future. Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even a flash of regret, before hardening again into suspicion. Convenient timing, though, isn't it? That you just happened to own the cottage we chose after our divorce. Not convenient. Daniel. Ironic. When Megan told me a couple had signed a rental agreement for the property, I had no idea it was you and Olivia. I only discovered that when your fraudulent documents crossed my desk. And you said nothing? Olivia demanded, incredulously. For 4 months you collected rent checks knowing we thought we were buying this place? I shook my head. You signed a clearly worded rental agreement that you never bothered to read. If you believed otherwise, that's not my responsibility. It was the real estate agent's responsibility to be clear, Olivia shot back. Megan Reynolds is one of the most respected real estate agents in the county, Nathan interjected. Her documentation is always meticulous. If you misunderstood the nature of the transaction, it wasn't because the terms were unclear. Daniel's expression had darkened further at the mention of Megan's name. Megan Reynolds, he repeated slowly. She's your friend, isn't she? The one who helped you purchase this cottage originally? I nodded, seeing no reason to deny it. She is. She also helped me establish the LLC that holds the property. So she deliberately steered us toward a cottage she knew belonged to you, he said, his tone hardening with each word. She misrepresented the transaction, knowing we believed we were purchasing the property. That's simply not true, I countered firmly. Megan never misrepresented anything. The documentation clearly stated you were entering into a lease agreement, not a purchase. If you didn't read the paperwork before signing it, that's hardly her fault. Daniel's face flushed with anger. This was a setup from the beginning. You and your friends conspiring to humiliate me. Not everything is about you, Daniel, I interrupted, my composure finally cracking. I bought this cottage for us, as a surprise, as a gift, because I loved you and wanted to build a future with you. You're the one who threw that future away when you decided 15 years meant nothing compared to a fresh start with someone new. The raw emotion in my voice seemed to startle all of us. For months, I had kept my pain carefully contained, refusing to give Daniel the satisfaction of seeing how deeply he had wounded me. But now, standing in the cottage that should have been our shared future, the mask slipped. Olivia had the grace to look uncomfortable, her gaze dropping to the floor as if suddenly unable to meet my eyes. Daniel, however, seemed almost energized by my display of emotion, as if finally spotting a weakness he could exploit. If this is really about our marriage, he said, his voice softening to that persuasive tone I knew so well, then perhaps we should discuss this privately. Just the two of us. There might be a way forward that honors what we once meant to each other. The manipulation was so transparent that I nearly laughed. There's nothing to discuss privately, Daniel. The cottage is mine. You have 30 days to vacate. That's the beginning and end of our business together. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. Come on, Rachel. We had 15 years together. That has to count for something. It counted for exactly 30 seconds on a phone call, I replied coldly. I need a change, Rachel. I've met someone else. I won't be home when you return. The direct quote seemed to catch him off guard. Maybe he'd forgotten the exact wording of the call that had destroyed our marriage, or perhaps he'd convinced himself the delivery had been more compassionate than it actually was. That was a mistake, he conceded, though whether he meant the method of delivery or the content itself remained deliberately ambiguous. I should have handled it differently. Yes, you should have, I agreed. But you didn't. And now we're here. Olivia had been watching this exchange with increasing agitation, her composure deteriorating with each passing moment. This is ridiculous, she finally snapped. You can't just march in here and expect us to pack up our lives in 30 days. We have the engagement party planned here next week. We've invited Daniel's entire firm, his father's colleagues from the city council. That sounds like a scheduling problem you'll need to address, I interrupted calmly. Perhaps one of those country clubs you mentioned last night could accommodate you on short notice. Her eyes widened with indignation. You're actually enjoying this, aren't you? Watching us scramble, disrupting our lives. No, Olivia, I replied honestly. I'm not enjoying any of this, but I am reclaiming what's rightfully mine, and I make no apologies for that. Daniel's expression had shifted again, calculation replacing persuasion. You know my father still has significant influence in this county, he said, his voice deceptively casual. One call from him, and your little property transfer could face all sorts of bureaucratic delays, regulatory reviews. The threat hung in the air between us, the implicit message clear. The Bennett family had the power to make my life difficult in ways that went beyond this cottage. Nathan stepped forward, his patience visibly exhausted. Are you really threatening to abuse your father's connections to interfere with a private property transaction? Because that would be highly unethical, possibly illegal, and certainly the kind of thing the state licensing board might take an interest in. Daniel's gaze snapped to Nathan, genuine anger flashing in his eyes. Stay out of this. This is between me and Rachel. No, Nathan replied firmly. It's not. Rachel has legal representation. She has documentation. She has witnesses. This isn't the private domain where you can intimidate her into backing down anymore. Something in Daniel seemed to snap at that moment. The careful facade of control crumbled, revealing the raw fury beneath. You have no idea what you've started, he snarled, turning back to me. I made you, Rachel. I can break you just as easily. The naked hostility in his voice sent a chill through me, but I stood my ground. You didn't make me, Daniel. You married me and then you unmade yourself when you chose to throw away everything we built together. Get out, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Get out of my cottage right now. It's not your cottage, I reminded him gently. That's rather the point of this entire conversation. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles whitening with the effort of restraint. For a moment, the tension in the room crystallized into something frightening, a glimpse of a rage I had never seen from him before, not even during our worst arguments. Nathan must have sensed it too, because he moved slightly closer to me, his presence steady and reassuring. I think we've said everything that needs saying for now, he suggested calmly. The legal documentation has been delivered. The 30-day clock has started. Any further communication can go through Rachel's attorney. Olivia looked between Daniel and me, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. This can't be happening, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else in the room. We can't lose the cottage, the wedding. I'm afraid it is happening, I replied, gathering my purse and the folder containing copies of the documentation we had already provided. And now we'll leave you to process this information privately. As Nathan and I turned to go, Daniel called after me, his voice tight with barely contained rage. This isn't over, Rachel. Not by a long shot. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the man I had once pledged to love for a lifetime, now a stranger consumed by fury and wounded pride. Yes, Daniel, I said quietly. It is. The walk back through the cottage felt endless, each step echoing on the hardwood floors I had once imagined living my life on. Nathan stayed close beside me, his presence a silent bulwark against the emotional storm raging inside me. We passed through the grand foyer with its sweeping staircase and stained glass window that cast jewel-toned patterns across the marble floor. In the living room, Olivia had replaced the built-in bookshelves with modernist art that clashed with the cottage's traditional character. The dining room chandelier, an antique crystal piece I had carefully researched, had been swapped for something sleek and contemporary. Each alteration felt like an erasure, not just of my vision for the cottage, but of the life I had planned to live here, a life that now would never exist. The crisp autumn air hit my face like a physical relief, the tension of the confrontation still clinging to my skin like something tangible. I drew a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. You okay? Nathan asked quietly as we reached his car. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was beginning to ebb, leaving me hollow and strangely vulnerable despite my victory. Once inside the car with the doors closed against the world, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully. My hands were trembling, I realized distantly, as if my body was only now processing the stress of the encounter. That was... Nathan began, then shook his head. I've known Daniel for 20 years, and I've never seen him like that. I have, I said softly. Not often, but enough to recognize it. When he feels truly cornered, truly threatened, there's a moment when the mask slips. Completely. Nathan pulled away from the curb, casting one last glance at the cottage receding in the rearview mirror. Do you think he'll cause problems? I know he will, I replied with certainty. Daniel doesn't lose gracefully. He never has. We drove in silence for several minutes, the familiar streets of Riverside Heights giving way to the main road leading back toward town. My mind replayed the confrontation on an endless loop. Daniel's expression when he realized the truth, Olivia's dawning, horror, the moment when threats replaced denial. Did I do the right thing? I asked suddenly, surprising myself with the question. Nathan glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. What do you mean? Confronting them like that, taking back the cottage, all of it. I stared out the window at the passing scenery, the autumn colors a blur of red and a gold. Part of me wonders if I should have just let them have it, moved on completely. Do you regret it? He asked carefully. I considered the question, examining my feelings with the honesty I'd promised myself after the divorce. No, I said finally. I don't regret reclaiming what's mine, but I'm not sure I was prepared for how it would feel. How does it feel? Complicated, I admitted. There's satisfaction, yes, relief even. But also, I searched for the right words, sadness, anger, a strange sense of loss, which makes no sense because I've already lost everything there was to lose between Daniel and me. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's it, though. Today made the ending real in a way it wasn't before. As long as there was still some unfinished business between you, some connection, however contentious, it wasn't really over. I finished for him. Now it is. Something like that, he agreed. We fell back into silence as the car wound its way toward downtown, the lake coming into view, sunlight shimmering across its surface. The boardwalk was dotted with couples and families enjoying the beautiful fall day, people living normal lives, untouched by the drama that had consumed my morning. He said he made me, I said after a while, the words emerging quietly. That everything I am came from him and his family. Nathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That's bullshit, and you know it. Intellectually, yes, I sighed. But emotionally, when someone spends 15 years subtly undermining your confidence, your independence, it leaves marks, Nathan. Invisible ones that you don't even notice until later, when you're trying to rebuild yourself. He was quiet for a moment. I watched it happen, he finally said. All those years, I saw how he chipped away at you piece by piece, the way he'd dismiss your ideas, then present them as his own a week later. The jokes at your expense that weren't really jokes. The constant reminders of how much you owed to the Bennett name. The accuracy of his observations startled me. You noticed all that? Everyone who really knew you noticed, he replied. We just didn't know how to help without making things worse. You loved him, and pointing out how he treated you seemed like it would only hurt you more. I absorbed this in silence, thinking of all the friends who had drifted away during my marriage, the relationships that had gradually faded until only the Bennett circle remained. Had they all seen what I couldn't? Had my isolation been partly self-imposed, a defense against truths I wasn't ready to face? When did it start? I asked, more to myself than to Nathan. When did I start becoming less so that Daniel could be more? Maybe that was the problem, Nathan suggested gently. You never became less, Rachel. You just got better at hiding how much more you were. And I think deep down Daniel knew that. It threatened him. We arrived at my building, the familiar facade of the Overlook a welcome sight after the emotional turbulence of the morning. Nathan pulled into a visitor space but made no move to turn off the engine, sensing perhaps that our conversation wasn't finished. Do you know what scares me the most? I said, staring up at the building that had become my sanctuary these past months. The thought that I might never fully trust my own judgment again, that some part of me will always wonder if I'm missing. The signs overlooking the red flags, because I did it for so long with Daniel. Nathan turned toward me, his expression somber. The fact that you're asking these questions, that you're examining your past and your patterns, that's exactly why you should trust yourself, Rachel. The person who doesn't question their own judgment is the one who should worry. The simple wisdom in his words penetrated the tangle of emotions I'd been wrestling with. There was something profoundly reassuring about being seen and understood without judgment, especially after years of having my perceptions subtly invalidated. I keep thinking about what Daniel said, I confessed, about using the cottage against him, as if I orchestrated this entire situation as some elaborate revenge plot. That's Daniel projecting, Nathan replied firmly. He assumes you think the way he does, strategically, vindictively. He can't conceive of a world where your actions aren't about him because in his world, everything revolves around him. I nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in his assessment. It's strange, but in some ways, I feel sorry for them. Nathan raised an eyebrow. For Daniel and Olivia? Yes, I said, surprising myself with the realization. They're building their relationship on such a shaky foundation. His midlife crisis, her ambition, mutual deception. Whatever they have, it started with betrayal, and that leaves a mark. Even if they stay together, there will always be that knowledge between them. That's remarkably compassionate, considering everything they've put you through. I shrugged slightly. Maybe. Or maybe it's just that I finally see Daniel clearly. The man I confronted today, angry, threatening, willing to use his father's influence to intimidate me, that's who he's always been beneath the polished exterior. I just didn't want to see it before. Nathan was quiet for a moment. And now? What do you want now, Rachel? The question was simple, but profound. What did I want, now that I had reclaimed the cottage, now that I had stood my ground against Daniel's attempts to intimidate me? What did I want for my future, beyond this moment of necessary confrontation? I began, then paused, considering my words carefully. I want to stop defining myself in relation to Daniel, as his ex-wife, as the woman he left, as the victor or victim in our shared history. I want to remember who I was before him and discover who I might become now on my own terms. Nathan nodded, a small smile touching his lips. That sounds like a pretty good starting point. I returned his smile, feeling something shift inside me, a tension releasing, a weight lifting. The confrontation with Daniel had been necessary, but it wasn't the end of my journey. In many ways, it was just the beginning. Thank you, I said, simply, for being there today, for seeing me, even when I couldn't see myself. Always, he replied, the single word carrying a depth of meaning neither of us was quite ready to explore. As I stepped out of the car into the crisp autumn air, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had set down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. The battle with Daniel wasn't over. I had no illusions about that. But the internal battlefield, the struggle to reclaim my sense of self and worth, felt suddenly less overwhelming. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I was standing firmly on my own ground. And that, I realized, was victory enough for today. 3 days passed in relative calm, the eye of the hurricane, I suspected, rather than a true peace. I threw myself into work at the gallery where I had recently been reinstated as director, grateful for the distraction of cataloging new acquisitions and planning the winter exhibition. On the fourth morning, the storm arrived. I was in my office reviewing proposal sketches when my assistant knocked and entered without waiting for a response, her expression unusually tense. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice low. "Olivia Patel." A cold weight settled in my stomach. I had expected Daniel to make the next move, not Olivia. How does she seem? Agitated, my assistant replied diplomatically, but contained. Should I tell her you're unavailable? I considered this for a moment, weighing the potential benefits of avoidance against the reality that this confrontation was inevitable. No, it's all right. Send her in. Moments later, Olivia appeared in my doorway. She was immaculately dressed as always, but the polished perfection of her appearance couldn't hide the strain evident in her face. Dark circles beneath her eyes suggested sleepless nights, and the tightness around her mouth spoke of sustained stress. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, closing the door behind her. The courtesy seemed forced, at odds with the tension radiating from her posture. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit down." She did so, perching on the edge of the seat as if ready to flee at any moment. For several seconds, she simply studied me, her expression unreadable. "You've lost weight," she finally said, the observation oddly personal. I wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected opening. "It's been a challenging adjustment." Olivia nodded, a quick, sharp movement. "Daniel hasn't been sleeping since your visit. He's been on the phone with lawyers, with his father, with colleagues. I've never seen him like this." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, genuinely meaning it despite everything. The image of Daniel spiraling, losing the control he valued so highly, brought me no joy. "Are you?" Olivia asked, her tone hardening slightly. "Sorry, I mean. Because from where I'm sitting, this looks very much like a calculated move designed to cause maximum disruption to our lives." I straightened in my chair, meeting her gaze directly. "I understand why it might appear that way to you, but as I explained before, this cottage was purchased long before your relationship with Daniel began. Its significance to me predates both of you." Her expression flickered with something, doubt, perhaps, or reluctant recognition. "Daniel says you're lying, that there's no way you could have afforded that cottage on your own." "Daniel has always underestimated me," I replied simply. "Financially, professionally, personally. It's a pattern I've only recently recognized clearly." Olivia shifted, in her seat, clearly uncomfortable with this assessment. "Look, I didn't come here to debate the past. I came to negotiate." I raised an eyebrow. "Negotiate?" "Yes." She reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a slim folder, placing it on my desk with deliberate care. "This is a formal offer to purchase the property at 17 Lakeshore Drive. Fair market value plus 15%. I didn't reach for the folder. "The cottage isn't for sale, Olivia. I believe I made that clear." "Everyone has a price," she insisted, echoing her words from our previous encounter. "And this offer is significantly above market rate. It would allow you to purchase any other property in the county with substantial funds left over." "It's not about the money," I said quietly. "Then what is it about?" she demanded, frustration breaking through her composed facade. "Revenge? Punishment? Making Daniel suffer for leaving you?" The accusations hung in the air between us, harsh but not entirely unexpected. It was easier for her to cast me as the vindictive ex-wife than to accept the more complicated truth. "It's about ownership," I said finally. "Not just of the cottage, but of my life. For 15 years, I bent and compromised and reshaped myself to fit into Daniel's world. I gave up pieces of myself so gradually I didn't even notice they were gone until after he left." I met her gaze directly. "That cottage is one of the few things that was truly mine. My choice, my vision, purchased with my money. So no, it's not for sale." Olivia stared at me, her expression a complex mixture of frustration and something that might have been reluctant understanding. "You don't seem to grasp what's at stake here. This isn't just about a cottage. Daniel's reputation, our future. I understand exactly what's at stake, I interrupted gently. Daniel's carefully constructed image is threatened by the revelation that he committed fraud. His pride is wounded by the discovery that his ex-wife outsmarted him. His new fiancée is embarrassed to admit to their social circle that the grand cottage they've been showcasing isn't actually theirs. Color rose in her cheeks. You're oversimplifying. Perhaps, I conceded. But so are you when you reduce my decision to spite or revenge. She leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. Our engagement party is scheduled for this weekend. Daniel's father has invited half the city council. People are flying in from across the country. We can't possibly relocate. Or postpone at this point. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of sympathy for her position. Whatever I thought of Olivia personally, whatever role she had played in the dissolution of my marriage, she was now caught in a situation, partially of Daniel's making. I'm not unreasonable, I said after a pause. You can hold your engagement party at the cottage as planned. Relief flashed across her face. Thank you, But, I continued firmly, the 30-day timeline still stands, and I'll need a formal acknowledgement in writing that you and Daniel understand the cottage is my property and that you will vacate by the specified date. Her relief quickly transformed back into tension. Daniel won't agree to that. Signing such a document would be tantamount to admitting he made a mistake. Then I'm afraid we don't have anything further to discuss, I replied, my resolve hardening. The legal situation is clear, regardless of whether Daniel formally acknowledges it. Olivia didn't move, her gaze searching my face as if looking for some weakness, some opening for negotiation. He says you've changed, that the Rachel he knew would never have done something like this. He's right, I acknowledged. The Rachel he knew, or thought he knew, was carefully constructed to accommodate his expectations. She prioritized his comfort over her own needs, his career over her aspirations, his image over her authenticity. I leaned back in my chair. That Rachel disappeared the moment he called to say he wasn't coming home. Something shifted in Olivia's expression, a flicker of discomfort, perhaps even recognition. He called you to end your marriage? I nodded, watching realization dawn in her eyes. Whatever narrative Daniel had constructed about our divorce, it clearly hadn't included this detail. 15 years, she said quietly, more to herself than to me. And he ended it with a phone call. 30 seconds, I confirmed. I timed. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her hands. When she looked up again, there was a new weariness in her eyes. What happens if we refuse to leave? If we contest the eviction? It was the question I had been expecting since the beginning, the inevitable resistance to the new reality I had created. Then we go to court, I replied calmly, where the documentation of my ownership is clear and incontrovertible, where the fraud Daniel committed is equally clear, where, I should add, everything becomes a matter of public record, including the fact that a respected architect failed to read or understand a standard lease agreement before forging documents to claim ownership. The implications hung heavy between us. Daniel's professional reputation, already potentially compromised by the private revelation of his fraud, would be publicly damaged by court proceedings. He'll fight, she said, though her tone suggested less certainty than her words. He doesn't back down. Ever. I know, I replied. I was married to him for 15 years. She studied me for a moment longer, then slowly collected the folder containing the purchase offer. I'll talk to Daniel about the engagement party and the rest. That would be wise, I agreed. As she stood to leave, Olivia paused, her expression shifting to something more personal, less guarded. Can I ask you something? Not about the cottage or Daniel, but woman to woman. I nodded, curious despite myself. "Does it get easier?" she asked, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. Living with the knowledge that someone could just walk away after years together, as if it meant nothing. The question caught me off guard, both in its vulnerability and its implication. Was she already seeing in Daniel what had taken me 15 years to recognize? The capacity for sudden, complete emotional detachment? "It doesn't get easier," I answered honestly. "But you get stronger. You rebuild yourself piece by piece until one day you realize you're standing on your own foundation again." Something like recognition flickered in her eyes, quickly masked but unmistakable. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, then turned and walked out of my office without another word. I sat motionless after she left, trying to process the unexpected turn our conversation had taken. Behind Olivia's polished exterior and practiced confidence, I had glimpsed something I recognized all too well: the first seeds of doubt, the earliest cracks in the foundation of certainty. For the first time, I wondered if Olivia might be more of a casualty in Daniel's story than I had initially believed. Not innocent, certainly. She had knowingly entered a relationship with a married man, but perhaps not the calculating homewrecker I had imagined in my darkest moments. My phone chimed with a message from Nathan. "Lunch? I'm downtown and could use friendly company." The invitation brought a small smile to my face, a welcome interruption to the heaviness of the morning. I typed back a quick acceptance, grateful for the prospect of ordinary conversation after the emotional complexity of Olivia's visit. As I gathered my things to meet Nathan, I reflected on the unexpected strength I had found in this confrontation. 6 months ago, perhaps even 1 month ago, I might have wavered in the face of Olivia's persistence. I might have accepted the generous offer, telling myself it was the practical choice, the path of least resistance. But today I had stood firm, not out of spite or vindictiveness, but from a place of genuine self-worth, of knowing what I deserved and refusing to settle for less. It was a small victory perhaps in the grand scheme of things, but it felt significant, a marker of how far I had come since the day Daniel's phone call had shattered my world. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was the one setting the terms of my life. And regardless of what challenges Daniel might still throw my way, that knowledge alone felt like a foundation strong enough to build upon. The afternoon light was beginning to fade as I drove toward Willow's edge. It had been 2 weeks since Harold Bennett's unexpected intervention at the engagement party, a public acknowledgement of my ownership that had sent shockwaves through Cedar Grove's social circles and left Daniel and Olivia scrambling to salvage their dignity. True to their agreement, they had vacated the cottage 3 days ago, leaving the keys with my attorney and departing without further communication. Now, as the cottage came into view against the backdrop of autumn foliage and the still waters of Cedar Lake, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and trepidation. This would be my first visit to the property as its undisputed owner, without the shadow of Daniel's presence or the complicated emotions of our confrontation. Megan's car was already in the driveway, as promised. She had insisted on being present for this initial walkthrough, both as my friend and as the property manager, who had overseen the cleaning crew after Daniel and Olivia's departure. "Perfect timing," she said as I approached the front door where she stood waiting, keys in hand. "The cleaners just finished an hour ago. It's all yours, Rachel, exactly as it should be." I accepted the keys, their weight in my palm both familiar and somehow new. "Thank you. For everything." She squeezed my arm gently. "You earned this. Every bit of it." As we stepped inside, I was immediately struck by how different the cottage felt without Daniel and Olivia's possessions and presence. The modern furnishings were gone, as were the sleek art pieces and designer touches that had defined their brief occupancy. What remained was the cottage itself, the bones of it, the essential character that had captivated me from the first time I'd seen it. The hardwood floors gleamed in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. The built-in bookshelves in the living room, which Olivia had partially removed and then been forced to restore, stood empty but full of possibility. The stained glass insets in the front door cast jewel-toned patterns across the foyer floor, just as they had the first time I'd toured the property years ago. They actually did a decent job with the restoration, Megan observed as we moved through the rooms. The original features are all back in place where possible. The kitchen updates they made actually add value, and they reversed most of the more intrusive modifications. I nodded, trailing my fingers along the banister of the staircase that led to the second floor. It feels empty, but not in a bad way, like a blank canvas. Megan smiled. That's exactly what it is now, your canvas. The master bedroom was the last room we visited, a spacious corner room with windows overlooking both the lake and the gardens. Olivia had painted it a stark white, replacing the warm cream color I had always envisioned for the space. The built-in window seat remained, though, its cushions removed but the structure intact. I always loved this spot, I said, sitting on the bare wood of the window seat and gazing out at the lake. I used to imagine spending mornings here with coffee, watching the sunrise over the water. Megan leaned against the doorframe, her expression softening. You can still have that, Rachel. That's the beauty of reclaiming what's yours. You get to decide what happens next. After completing our tour, we stood on the back porch overlooking the gardens and the lake beyond. The property stretched down to a small private dock where a pair of Adirondack chairs faced the water, the only outdoor furniture Daniel and Olivia had left behind. So, Megan asked as the afternoon light began to fade, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, what are you thinking? Will you move in? I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp autumn air scented with pine and lake water. It was a question I had been wrestling with for weeks, whether to embrace the cottage as my home or to sell it and truly start fresh elsewhere. I don't know yet, I admitted. Being here feels right in some ways, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to fill it with new memories or if the old ones are still too present. You don't have to decide today, Megan reminded me gently. The cottage has stood here for over a century. It can wait a little longer for you to make up your mind. She was right, of course. After months of fighting for ownership, I now had the luxury of time to consider my options, to envision different futures, to make choices based on what I truly wanted rather than in reaction to Daniel's actions. I should get going, Megan said, checking her watch. I've got a showing across town in 30 minutes. Will you be okay here by yourself? I nodded, feeling a surprising sense of peace settle over me. I'll be fine. I think I'll stay a little longer just to sit with the place, get reacquainted. After Megan left, I wandered back through the cottage, this time allowing myself to linger in each room, taking mental inventory of what remained and what I might envision for the space. Without the pressure of confrontation or the weight of Daniel's presence, I could see the cottage more clearly for what it was. Not just a battleground in our divorce, but a beautiful, historical home with its own character and charm. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along the new countertops, sleek quartz that actually complemented the cottage's traditional elements better than I would have expected from Daniel's modern tastes. The appliances were top of the line, a significant upgrade from the aging ones that had been there before. Perhaps I could work with some of the changes they had made, I reflected. Keep what enhanced the space and gradually modify what didn't, align with my vision. It would be a process of reclamation rather than erasure, acknowledging the cottage's recent history while shaping its future according to my own aesthetic and needs. As twilight deepened outside the windows, I made my way to the back porch once more, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs to watch the last light fade from the sky. The lake stretched before me, a mirror reflecting the deepening blue above, a few early stars beginning to appear. The peacefulness of the moment was interrupted. by the sound of tires on the gravel driveway. A car door closed, followed by footsteps approaching from the side of the house. I tensed, wondering if Daniel had returned for some forgotten item, a confrontation I wasn't prepared for in this moment of quiet contemplation. Instead, Nathan appeared at the corner of the porch, his expression uncertain as he spotted me in the gathering darkness. "Rachel," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Your car was here, but the house was so dark, I wasn't sure if you were still around." "Just sitting with the place," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. "Thinking." He hesitated, then joined me, settling into the chair with a sigh. "It's peaceful out here." "It is. How did you know I'd be here?" "Megan mentioned you were doing the walkthrough today. I thought you might want company afterward, or space. I wasn't sure which, to be honest." The consideration in this simple admission touched me deeply. Unlike Daniel, who had always assumed his presence was welcome, needed even, Nathan recognized my autonomy, my right to solitude if that was what I preferred. "Company is good," I said softly. "I've been in my head too much today." We sat, in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the last light faded from the sky and more stars emerged overhead. The temperature was dropping with the sun, the crisp autumn evening cooling quickly toward a chilly night. "What do you think?" Nathan finally asked, his voice quiet against the backdrop of gentle waves lapping at the shore below. "About the cottage, I mean, now that it's officially, undisputedly yours." I considered the question, trying to articulate the complex mixture of feelings the property evoked. "It's beautiful. It always has been. But I'm not sure if it's my home or just a symbol of something I needed to reclaim." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Those don't have to be mutually exclusive, you know. It can be both a symbol of your strength and a place you genuinely love." "True," I acknowledged. "But I'm also not sure I want the constant reminder of the battle it took to get here. Sometimes fresh starts really need to be fresh." We lapsed into silence again, the darkness now complete, except for the faint glow of the moon reflecting on the lake. Despite the chill, I felt no urgency to leave, as if something important remained unresolved, some decision still hovering just beyond my grasp. "I got a call today," Nathan said suddenly, "from Portland, that architectural preservation firm I interviewed with last month." My heart stuttered slightly at his words. Nathan had mentioned the possibility of this job weeks ago, a prestigious position with a firm specializing in historic restoration, a perfect fit for his expertise and passion. But it was in Oregon, nearly 3,000 miles away from Cedar Grove. "They offered you the position," I said, a statement rather than a question. "They did," he confirmed. "Senior project manager, overseeing their historic district revitalization. It's everything I've wanted professionally." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it despite the sudden hollow feeling in my chest. "When would you start?" "January." He shifted in his chair to face me, though in the darkness I could barely make out his expression. "Rachel, I haven't accepted. Yet." "Why not? It sounds perfect for you." His hesitation was palpable, a tangible thing in the darkness between us. "Because there are other considerations, things that matter to me beyond the professional opportunity." "Like what?" I asked, though something in me already knew the answer. "Like you," he said simply. "Like us. Whatever this connection between us is or might become." The admission hung in the air, honest and unadorned. In the months since my divorce, Nathan had been my constant support, my sounding board, my anchor in a storm of uncertainty. But we had carefully avoided labeling the deepening bond between us, both aware of my need to rediscover myself outside the context of a relationship. "I would never ask you to stay for me," I said quietly. "Not when this opportunity is so perfect for you." "I know you wouldn't ask," he replied. That's not why I'm telling you. I wanted you to know all the factors I'm weighing, and to see if maybe, possibly, you might be considering your own fresh start too. The implication was clear but undemanding. An invitation without pressure, a door opened that I was free to walk through or not. Portland is supposed to be beautiful, I said after a moment, my voice barely above a whisper. Good art scene, progressive, not unlike Cedar Grove but with mountains and the Pacific, instead of lakes. I could sense rather than see his smile in the darkness. It is. And they have an excellent photography museum that happens to be looking for a new curator. My breath caught. You checked. I did some research, he admitted. Just exploring possibilities. The thought crystallized suddenly in my mind. A new city, a fresh professional challenge, distance from the familiar patterns and painful memories of Cedar Grove. It wasn't running away. It was moving toward something on my own terms. I'd need time, I said carefully, to think it through properly. To make sure if I did go, it would be for me, not just to follow you. Of course, he agreed immediately. That's essential. I wouldn't want it any other way. Another thought occurred to me, my gaze traveling back to the cottage behind us, a darker silhouette against the night sky. And I'd need to decide what to do with Willow's edge. What are you thinking? Nathan asked. I turned the possibilities over in my mind, seeing the cottage with new clarity. I think this place deserves to be loved. To be a home, not a trophy or an investment, but maybe not my home. You could sell it, he suggested. Start completely fresh. I could, I agreed, but there's another option I've been considering. The next morning, I sat across from Megan in her office, a folder of property documents between us on the desk. Her expression was professionally neutral, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes as I explained what I wanted to do. You're sure about this? She asked when I finished. It's a significant decision, Rachel. One that would substantially reduce the financial benefit of your ownership. I'm sure, I replied, feeling a sense of certainty that had been elusive for months. The cottage was never about money for me. It was about reclaiming what was mine so I could decide its fate, not Daniel. Megan nodded slowly, beginning to see the shape of my vision. And you've decided. I have. I want to donate Willow's edge to the Cedar Grove Historical Society, with specific conditions for its use as an artist's retreat and community gallery space. The cottage has too much history, too much character to be just one person's home. It should belong to the community. As Megan began outlining the process for such a donation, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The cottage had served its purpose in my journey. It had been the catalyst for reclaiming my power, for standing up to Daniel, for rediscovering my own worth. But holding on to it now felt like clinging to the past when I was ready to step into a future of my own making. Over the following weeks, as autumn deepened into winter, the plans for Willow's Edge took shape. The Historical Society was overjoyed at the prospect of acquiring such a significant property, especially with the endowment I proposed to establish for its maintenance and programming. The board enthusiastically approved my vision for the space, place where local artists could work in residence, where gallery shows could introduce Cedar Grove to new talents, where the community could gather for cultural events by the lake. Daniel, when he learned of my plans through inevitable small-town channels, was reportedly furious. According to mutual acquaintances, he viewed the donation as a deliberate move to prevent him from ever reacquiring the property, even accusing me of destroying our heritage by giving away a valuable asset. What he failed to understand, what he had always failed to understand, was that my decisions were no longer about him at all. The donation wasn't designed to spite Daniel. It was shaped by my own values and vision for what the cottage could become. Harold Bennett, in contrast, surprised me with a handwritten note expressing his respect for my decision. "You have found a way to honor the property's significance while ensuring its future," he wrote. "A thoughtful solution that serves the community rather than personal interests. I have always admired your capacity for seeing beyond the immediate." Olivia, I heard through gallery circles, had relocated to Chicago shortly after moving out of the cottage, pursuing a design opportunity there and effectively ending her engagement to Daniel. Whether this was a direct result of the ownership revelation or simply the final straw in an already strained relationship remained unclear. Part of me wished her well in her fresh start, recognizing in her journey echoes of my own. As for Nathan, he accepted the position in Portland, but delayed his start date until March, giving us both time to thoughtfully consider our next steps. We agreed to move forward separately but in parallel, me exploring the curator position on its own merits, him establishing himself in his new role, with the understanding that whatever developed between us would be built on mutual choice rather than dependency. The day before Christmas, standing on the shore of Cedar Lake with snow dusting the ground around us, I signed the final papers transferring ownership of Willow's Edge to the Historical Society. The cottage stood proudly behind us, windows glowing with warm light from the small celebration the board had organized inside. "Are you sad to let it go?" Nathan asked as we watched the society's president unlock the front door with ceremonial flourish, photographers from the local paper capturing the moment. I considered the question honestly, searching for any hint of regret or loss. "No," I replied, surprising myself with the completeness of the certainty. "I'm ready. The cottage has fulfilled its purpose in my life. Now it gets to serve a new one." Later that evening, as we drove away from Willow's Edge for what might be the last time, I didn't look back at the cottage receding in the distance. Instead, my gaze remained forward, focused on the road ahead and the man beside me who had supported my journey without trying to direct it. The transformation that had begun with a devastating phone call had culminated not just in reclaiming a cottage, but in reclaiming myself, my autonomy, my confidence, my capacity for genuine connection, uncompromised by fear or accommodation. I had emerged from the wreckage of my marriage not diminished, but expanded, not hardened, but more authentically myself. The woman who had once shaped herself to fit Daniel's expectations and tolerated his subtle undermining now stood firmly in her own truth, unwilling to compromise her worth for anyone's convenience or comfort. This was the true victory, far more significant than the temporary satisfaction of watching Daniel and Olivia discover who really owned their dream home. The cottage had been a catalyst, a crucible, a tangible representation of the intangible transformation occurring within me. Now, as winter settled over Cedar Grove and I prepared for the possibilities of a new year in a new city, I recognized that the most important ownership I had reclaimed wasn't of Victorian architecture and historic grounds, but of my own story, my own values, and my own future. Whatever came next, whether in Portland or elsewhere, with Nathan or on my own, would be shaped not by reaction to past wounds, but by authentic desires and conscious choices. The betrayal that had once seemed like an ending had proven instead to be a beginning. Painful and unwelcome, yes, but ultimately transformative in ways I could never have imagined on that devastating day 15 months ago. As we reached the main road leading away from the lake, Nathan reached across to take my hand, a simple gesture of connection that required no words. I interlaced my fingers with his, grateful for his presence but equally grateful for my own hard-won strength that allowed me to choose this relationship rather than cling to it from fear or need. Daniel had betrayed me after 15 years together, and his new wife had indeed discovered who really owned their dream home. But the true revelation, the one that would carry me forward long after the drama of property ownership faded into memory, was the discovery of who I really was behind the roles I had played for so long. And that woman, I now knew with unshakable Certainty was more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.